Good afternoon. My name is Brooke Lusk, and on behalf of the Department of Health, the Get Screened SD program, All Women Count program, and Comprehensive Cancer Control program, I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar. This is part 2 of our webinar series on Motivational Interviewing 101. I'm going to introduce our speaker in just a minute. Just a couple of logistic items. I did send out 2 handouts for the webinar. If for some reason you did not get the handout, you can send me an email to blusk@ty.net, and I'll get that to you. And if you have any trouble during the webinar, you can also send me an email. As a reminder, as Mark said, please mute your lines so that we can clearly hear Kate. So our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Kate Speck. Kate has 36 years experience working in the field of behavioral health. Kate is currently with the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center as a senior research manager. And she has taught addictions counseling courses for 18 years in the community, and for the last 12 years has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in psychology, addictions, and ethics at the post-secondary level. Kate is also a member of the International Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, or MINT, and she has provided training and technical assistance in the use of motivational interviewing since 2000. So, Kate, I'll turn things over to you.
Excellent, Brooke, and I want to thank you so much on behalf of the Black Hills Special Services Cooperative and all the participants for all the work that you've done to put this together. And I also want to thank Mark East, Technical Coordinator Extraordinaire, who has helped us make sure that we're up and running and in good form. So I appreciate that as a prelude. Well, I'm happy to spend the next hour with you to talk about motivational interviewing and a continuation of what we have wanted to bring to you in terms of just the introductory level, the 101, as Brooke was mentioning. And the idea behind this webinar, of course, is to help prep you for this and hopefully give you some usable kinds of things to address. So I've just got this again for our next piece. So let's move to the first slide of the first area. I want to talk a little bit about this kind of whole idea of increasing our knowledge of behavior change. And the idea behind that, of course, is that we have had some frustrations in our past, usually related to this behavior change and why people don't change that behavior. And as an evidence-based practice, motivational interviewing has helped us to understand change in a different way and has partnered with a lot of other change initiatives to try to understand what's going on internally related to change, as well as some of the external kinds of things that we as practitioners are having to do with our clients or patients. So this idea of health coaching and so forth is really what I want to promote. It's more about this. Motivational interviewing really not to get someone to do what you want them to do as much as it is a kind of guiding style, if you will, related to what we want to happen or helping them kind of make a choice related to what they want to happen in their own lives. So we talk about this as health coaching. And our basics, of course, we want our goals, we're looking at the basics of motivational interviewing and creating that climate for change and really thinking about your involvement with this change piece as a conversation about change in itself. Not that your conversation makes something happen, but as a result, we do find that that is really the biggest mark of that is just having a conversation about change really makes a difference in terms of what people then end up doing. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the steps that we use in evoking change talk, which is another iconic word that we use in MI, which is change talk versus sustain talk. And that kind of thing would be the kinds of conversations that you hear about, I can't, I won't, you can't make me kind of thing, is that what we call sustain talk. And the change talk is more about the I will, I can, I'll try, those kinds of monikers that we use in our conversations. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of these processes that promote successful change and look at ways to do that in terms of utilizing our conversation as a way to stay away from the nervous part that people have about changing, and we call that ambivalence, because people get nervous about changing, and we want to dial that down just a little bit. So now I want to talk with you a little bit about your handouts. And so one of the handouts is there's a few things to fill in on your handout, which is kind of the PowerPoint. It's really not the slides, but it's more the PowerPoint information. And then the second handout that you have is a handout about how to learn. It's called Learning How to Learn Motivational Interviewing. And I put this together as a part of today's presentation, just to kind of get have you have a sense of there's a lot of things going on in motivational interviewing to deal with, and so there's a number of things in here that are going to back up what we're going to learn today on the webinar. If you have any questions about those, please make sure that you get with Brooke on that, and she will get your questions answered, or she'll get to me about that. So in moving forward then, I'm going to pull this forward here. The major goals of the motivational interviewing approach themselves. And thinking about our major goals and what our major goals are is really we want to create that set of conditions. And what we're trying to do is have the person actually pay attention to their own motivation for change. And their motivation can be a variety of different things. It could be that somebody's kind of on their back, if you will, or maybe they've been on their own back, if you will. You know, there's that whole idea of I should do this, I wish I could do this, and, you know, what's the matter with me that I can't do this? And so there's a lot of internal dialogue that may be going on in the person's head, and we don't know what that is. And so this conversation about change really helps us to set those conditions to enhance their own motivation and commitment for change. So we're looking at this focus, if you will, helping them focus on their situation in what we would call a non-judgmental way, because we do find that a lot of folks end up judging themselves related to I can't do this, or I haven't done it, or I should have done it years ago. And you'll hear people say that often, why didn't I do that years ago? Why didn't I take up biking, or why didn't I go bowling or walking, those kinds of things. So we want to help them explore and resolve that ambivalence about change by having them talk about it and bring to the surface those ideas that might be troubling them on the inside that we actually can't see, and maybe they haven't even really said out loud either. So the essentials of motivational interviewing then, I think I got to go back one part of my slides is I talked about this, this last point on the slide is to assist the person to move through the stages of change. And we know a lot of us out there in the audience, I know you know what stages of change are and those kinds of things. However, we want sustained, successful change with this. So the essentials of motivational interviewing have to do with a number of different elements here, is that we want to elicit this motivation or this information from the client. And we want to do that because as the client becomes more involved in the conversation or in the ideas, they become more anchored to it. That the client's task, not the counselor's, to resolve the ambivalence. So our job in that whole piece about resolving ambivalence is really to continue that discussion and help them look at what are the both sides of the issue that they're feeling ambivalent about. And it's interesting also is that lots of times ambivalence is not so much about one or the other, although often is, but there may be a lot of choices out there. And so there may be a number of different kinds of things that they might need to deal with to resolve that ambivalence. And what we find is that when they do resolve the ambivalence, their motivation or their level to change is much more activated than it was in the past. And, of course, we find that this direct persuasion, even though we may know the answer or have the data or the science behind what it is we're trying to help them with, lowering their blood sugar, addressing issues with alcohol and substance use, taking care of taking their medications on a regular basis as they should, and even taking care of dental care kinds of things, is that these things, even though we know lots of things about that, when we are putting that direct conversation in there, that direct persuasion, it oftentimes sets a person back in their change process. And then, of course, we want to support them in identifying the ambivalence, but also in resolving that, which can take some time. So the time element for some folks may be longer than we would like to see, but it's well worth it when they finally get through that process. And then the other piece is that we want to value their autonomy. So their values around the issue. Many people have values that relate to specific kinds of habits that they have. So values need to be explored as well to find out what is going on with that, and to be respectful of those values as well as the choice that the client may have in moving that forward in whatever way they need to move that forward. So we want to have that essential area covered. Other essentials that we look at is that our job really is to help resolve the ambivalence, and that to understand that this readiness to change piece that we talk about is, even though a person might be in a specific stage of change, that the stages of change and the motivation of the person may be fluctuating. So it may go up and down. It's similar to on Monday morning, I'm going to start, I'm going to do it, I'm going to keep it up. But by Thursday, the motivation or the energy or excitement about that is like, gee, I really want a soda today. I stopped drinking soda with sugar in it, but today is the day for soda. So we want to think about those kinds of things in terms of a fluctuating state for folks. And that we look at change talk as recognized, of course, and responded to, as well as resistance in terms of why I would not want to do something, and we call that sustained talk. But we treat that in a constructive manner, in a manner that will help us move things along, and we acknowledge it for the person. So just some of the basic skills I want to talk about here that we would like to have practitioners adopt is unconditional acceptance. And the idea behind this unconditional acceptance has to do with, even though a person may be in a difficult situation and not quite ready to change, even struggling with change, wanting to do it but not doing it, we have to be in a position to completely accept where they're at, because that's what helps create the conditions around change. When a person is not feeling as though someone else is kind of watching them or pushing them, they then take action themselves. And, of course, it's always, much better when they do that. Empathy. So understanding another person's emotions and feelings. Their values might come into this as well, but what's their frame of reference? What is important to them, and what makes them connected to the change itself? And then enhancing self-efficacy. And in this piece, we often talk about the counselor. Now, I call practitioners, doctors, attorneys, therapists, healthcare coaches, nursing, they're counselors. Our job is really to tend to the basic health or basic needs of our clients, patients, consumers, or customers, if you will, in a lot of ways. And so we utilize that term counselor as a person who's fostering assistance or help. But this self-efficacy piece is all about the idea of hope. And hope may be something that a person might need to find or see that they can actually create change even when they've tried to do it in the past and have not. So creating hope for our clients in this kind of the idea of you can do it without cheerleading and without moving ahead or too fast before the client. Well, now I'm going to move into another slide here that talks a bit about the kinds of things that we covered in our last segment, our last session, so I think it's worth a little bit of review. And if you'll take a look, I'll just go ahead and start. As you're looking at the monitor, I'll take a look at the top left here, where we have all these kinds of things and these circles about what may be going on with a person. So there may be lots of different things that are going on with a person that is not described in their behavior. So what we're trying to do is look underneath all of those kinds of things and look at what else might be going on to be a barrier to the change that the person may be unable to move toward. The next thing is OARS, so the OARS, the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We'll talk a little bit more about those today. I introduced those at our last session. That little guy there that's kind of hanging between the two cliffs is my favorite picture in regard to ambivalence, what it feels like to be caught in the middle. That's what it feels like to be ambivalent. And so because it's so uncomfortable, and because what we find out in psychology is that it's very difficult for the human mind to hold two opposing thoughts. Therefore, it's that rocking back and forth between one thought or the other. And therefore, that is where we as practitioners get in the middle of that and begin to rock with the client and try to sort out what is going on between the one idea or the other idea that's happening in their head. I'm going to go down now to these circles at the bottom left of the monitor, and there's the idea of spirit. And where spirit comes in is that collaboration with the person, acceptance, of course, we've talked about that, compassion, and that's our role in helping them or assisting them, and then this evocation, which is evoking or eliciting from that person ideas around why they might want to make a change. The engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning arrows, those are the processes that we covered last time. So we talked a little bit about how we get to the change piece, and definitely we have to have engagement, focus it on a particular piece of change, evoke around that piece of change, and then plan around that change as well. So the fire's going on in the middle there, and basically what the fire is all about is turning up the heat on ambivalence and turning up the heat on this developing discrepancy piece. So you see the icon with the book Motivational Interviewing, and I'm sure that some of you may already have had that or have access to that, and that's the 3rd edition. And we also talk about this piece in here we talked last week, and the cat just came into the picture, and the cat is representative of the discussion we had regarding the writing reflex. And the writing reflex is our getting into the mix of change too fast. When we see people doing things that are destructive or harmful to them, we want to do something about it. And our advice or recommendation would be we have great knowledge, but until the person is on board with us in terms of the change process, we don't want to be putting that out there too much, because we get into the fix-it role, and the fix-it role does not help us in terms of moving the client along. So oftentimes that ambivalence or that writing reflex can grow and really hurt us. Now, I just took away the what is unique to motivational interviewing, and I want to talk a little bit about that, just to remind you that we have a specific way of going about it, about what we're focusing on. So that target behavior that's up there, that target that you see in the top right of the screen, has to do with examining or talking or discussing or counseling around a specific issue of change. So it might be, how do I lower my A1Cs? It might be there's a particular behavior we want the person to do around that. And so there may be a variety of things, but oftentimes we overwhelm our conversations because there's so much in chronic health issues that takes precedence, and we want to solve it all as soon as we can. So that target behavior is really focusing on one area and letting the client get some level or measure of success around that before we move on to some of the other areas. And you'll see then at the very bottom here, I've got this persuading piece that just came on this online. And that persuading piece is, again, something that we are watching out for. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about those unique properties of motivational interviewing, this intentional and differential focus on the change talk piece, and also looking at hopefully moving toward a commitment. And so the other thing that you'll see that just came up there is to avoid the expert trap. Even though we have expertise, we can get into some traps about that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more today about the traps. So if you take a look at your one handout, I believe it's number 2, that we have there, Learning How to Learn Motivational Interviewing. I've got these 8 stages of learning motivational interviewing, and that was written up in an article that I have cited for you on this piece. And the idea of all of that stuff that we're going to be just reviewing or going over today. Then the definitions of motivational interviewing, I wanted to have you take a look at that again, just so that for your information. And then we're moving into this issue of the traps, this expert trap that we've talked about. So some things to remember here again are this is a conversation about change, the change that moves the client forward. It's about a target behavior, and that we collaborate and evoke around change talk with the client. And we use this differential direction, if you will, about the person's desire to change, their ability to do that change, the reason and need for change, and then getting to a level of commitment. So that just kind of rounds up all of the elements of what we're going to talk about today. So in this communication trap, and on your sheet, on your handout number 2, you have these all together. And so I want to talk a little bit about them. And the idea would be is that you take a few notes. I left some lines there for you to take some notes. And I believe there are some open spaces on your other handout as well for you to fill in the blanks as we go along. So these communication traps can be a big part of what we don't want to get into, particularly with the client or our consumer. And so the big one that we end up getting in is often this first one, which is called the question and the answer trap. We'll talk a little bit more about the expert trap, the labeling trap, the premature focus trap, and of course the blaming trap. Those are all things that kind of get in the way of good conversation about change. So this question and answer trap sets the expectation that you're going to be the one who's asking the questions and then the client answers. And so it's kind of like this question and the client answers and back and forth. And so we really want that not to happen because we want to have a conversation. And we can be quite strategic in asking all of these questions, but it's not just about asking questions. In motivational interviewing, we do a lot of work on how to ask really good questions and how to help us move the conversation along by using these questions. So what we want to do is engage the client to be a big part of the conversation. So if we're asking questions that they can answer yes, no, this, that, and short answers, that's not getting us underneath what may be going on for the client. So in terms of asking a question, we really are trying to evoke a conversation around that question. And we don't want the client to just get into the role of being passive about all of the kinds of things that are happening because they've been in that position before, perhaps. So in terms of the next one here, the expert trap, and of course I have my little cartoon up there. It says there's a chicken there. I think it's a chicken who's got the sky is falling, of course. And the guy says to the environmental forum, it says, my understanding I would be the only speaker. Well, of course, we want to parlay that into the idea that the expert trap is not about expertise or your knowledge, because we definitely want that to shine. However, when we get in the role of the expert, then that, again, puts the client into that, again, another passive role. And oftentimes the question and answer trap and the expert trap go together because it's kind of like, well, I'll ask all of these questions, and then when we're finished, I'll have all the answers, and then I'll lay that out for you. And so it kind of ends up with, again, we want the client not to be passive in the conversation or the consultation, to be able to have activity related to their ability to name and claim some of the things that are going on. And unless they're able to do that, it's very hard for us to continue to have a conversation. The labeling trap now is one in which a lot of people, talk about the idea of, if I just know what it is I'm dealing with, all the better. I can then deal with it. And what we want to be careful is that a lot of people end up saying, well, I'm a diabetic, or I have hypertension, or I have this other ailment, if you will, the diagnosis. And that's kind of where the conversation stops. It's kind of like, oh, yes, very complex issue. What can anyone do about that? And so, again, this whole labeling trap is to avoid the idea that that something still can be done even though there's a label. So we don't want to pay attention to the diagnostic label, if you will, whatever that diagnosis is, in favor of action toward change. So a lot of people just stop at they stop right at the labeling piece. And they sometimes the other thing that happens with the labeling trap is the opposite, and the opposite of that is that like the label. And so when the label comes across as something that is, creates some dynamics for them. For instance, a woman of the age of 68 falling, the first thing that person might think of is, oh my gosh, what if I break my hip? Because that's a common kind of thing that you might be thinking about. And so it's like this person might be falling, but they don't recognize it or they don't acknowledge it because they're afraid that if people know that means they're old and frail. So labels can sometimes be put on people, and the aging process might be one of them, and it doesn't have to necessarily be aging, but again, any kind of label might get an adverse effect for that person. So labeling can be a double-edged sword. The next one then is what we call the premature focus trap. And this premature focus trap is to help us to avoid getting right down and dirty so quickly. It's kind of like the more specialist we are, the more quickly we want to focus on the problem. It's kind of like going to a specialist who has orthopedic specialty, and all they want to talk about is the broken bone. But there may be other things that the individual should really maybe focus on. For instance, they may need to focus on increasing their balance by doing other exercises, or being more cognizant of utilizing maybe assistive kinds of things like the cane or whatever. So now we want to look at the whole kind of thing piece at first. So we want to focus broadly at first so that we can kind of get an idea of all the things that are going on around that particular issue. And the other thing that happens with the premature focus trap is that because people can become defensive about that, and they want their whole situation to be understood. So just talking about the broken bone might not get you what you want. So that premature focus trap really can interrupt a conversation, if you will. The last one that I want to talk about is the blaming trap. The premature focus trap gets us a lot of discord, by the way. Now, I don't have a slide for the blaming trap, but I have a sense that you probably know what that is already, and that's that idea of who should we blame for this problem. Should we blame McDonald's because, they serve fattening foods or hot coffee or whatever? Should we blame the patient? And oftentimes it's really interesting in that blaming piece is that patients blame themselves for their lack of progress or for not being able to understand or respond to these problems. So the blaming piece, while it's there, it may be hidden. And I'd like you to explore that, or that can be explored with the client in such a way that the person, again, does not feel blamed or has a sense that they are accepted, even though they also do have a responsibility to make some change. Now, I've got on here this little readiness to change piece here. And we typically use this thing called the importance and confidence ruler. And so or the readiness ruler, talking to people about, how ready are you to make this change? It's a simple question to ask, but we often don't ask. We make assumptions that the person's really wanting to do things, and then they end up frustrated, we end up frustrated when it comes to trying to effect change in some way. And so this issue is best addressed by asking a question, and that is, where are you at in terms of the readiness for change? And we talk about the 0 or the 1 as being low of readiness and the 10 being of high readiness. So there are two other things that we look at is in terms of the readiness is that the importance of the change to the person, because they may have 6 things going on with them, and what you're talking with them about may be 6th on the list. So we want to find out where they're at in terms of how important it is. And then the other thing that happens, and this is very subtle in terms of the conversation, but we also want to find out what is their level of confidence about making a change about whatever it is we're addressing. So lots of times people have made efforts, and we've not looked at the efforts. We don't talk about the efforts that they've made and why those efforts have not worked. So we don't want to get into this trap that we did before. Like you give the information, they say that doesn't work. You give another piece of information, they say, well, we tried that too, and that didn't work either. So it ends up being a frustrating conversation when we are not really, trying to examine these questions for the person. So on a scale of 1 to 10, we utilize this. How ready are you to make this change on a scale of 1 to 10? And it's interesting that you can get a lot of conversation around this because if it makes the person think on a scale of 1 to 10 where they might be. Anything above a 5, of course, we're looking for, that's where a person is on the other half of change, or they're doing something about it. But anything under a 5, we're looking at, that may be telling us that we need to chunk up these health elements in terms of steps that a person might take rather than overwhelming them with the change process itself. So a great way to go about that is to talk about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you, and how confident are you that you can accomplish this goal, and have the conversation around that piece. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the core conversational strategies, or what we call 4 early strategies called the ORs, which are open-ended questions, affirmations or affirming, reflective listening, and summarizing. And that's this differential movement that we have in terms of how are we really engaging the client in terms of our conversation. So we talk about these being good tools for eliciting what we call positive change talk. And, of course, when we ask questions, we're also probably going to get some sustained talk, and we want to pay more attention to the change talk than the sustained talk. And we often say that these are tools for guiding people toward that change talk as we look at that in a skilled way. So the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question, and it's really interesting. We pretty much know that. I mean, that's something that's good knowledge that we have. And of course, the open question here gives us a variable answer. So you asking a question like, "What would your life look like if you quit smoking?" is a question that makes the person think. They're thinking about this, about what my life might be like. And sometimes they can come up with kind of a quick answer. It would be bad. I don't know how I could do it. But you're still getting information from them about moving the conversation along, even if you get what we call sustained talk from this open question. Versus a closed question, and take a look at this question, do you think you can stop smoking? So, it's a yes or a no or I don't know, something that doesn't get us information like that first question, which is an open question, and eliciting from them, again, my life would be better, or it might have concerns about it. I might be scared. I don't know what my life would look like because I've never tried to stop smoking. So think about the questions that we're asking in our assessing what's going on with the client. Now, here's some examples of open-ended questions, and those should be in your handouts as well. And it's kind of like, I often say, try to think about your questions such as how you would be if you were Larry King live. Some people don't know who Larry King is, but he's, of course, one of those famous, iconic interviewers that we've had for a number of years, and he, of course, finally retired. But these what, how questions, when you were successful with your weight reduction, what kinds of things were you doing? If you take a look at these questions, what they do is they provide the client with some momentum to think about what might be going on. So you can see there I have a number about weight reduction, alcohol use, smoking, blood sugar, etc., and relationship issues might be going on there. So these are some really good questions that elicit from the client their own thoughts about it. And what we're really trying to move toward, again, as you know, is we're moving toward eliciting what their reasons are for change. Why would change be important for them? Now, the next one is the A for affirmation. And for affirmation, we want to do this whole idea of thinking about, and it's really not, gee, thanks for coming in today. It's more about affirming a person who's moving toward a goal, or affirming that they are making strides, if you will, toward that goal. So perhaps somebody's A1C isn't down as far as they would like, but it's down. And it's affirming that it's down in that relation because there's some progress that has been made in terms of this piece. Oh, sorry, I messed that up a little bit. Sorry about that. And the idea behind the affirmation, of course, is that we want it to be something that's congruent and genuine. It's very easy to become patronizing, say, "Oh, good job." I go to the gym every once in a while, and the instructor's there. We're doing our exercises and all that kind of stuff, and they're not even looking at the rest of us doing our exercises. They're just saying, "Good job, everybody. Good job." Well, to me, I think about that, and I think, well, how do you know it's a good job? I might have my bike set on the easiest gear ever, and I just look like I'm working hard, and I'm really not. So again, we want to be congruent and genuine in our affirmations, but also to know that these are things that they can be very powerful in terms of helping a person build their confidence in this ability to change and make something happen for themselves. So if my client has worked on stopping smoking and they've been focusing on it, and even though they have not done anything but cut down, I'm going to be talking with them about the successful ways they've worked at in cutting down, and talking about how positive that is in terms of the long run, and how that might play out down the road as they continue this. Now, the next one is the idea of reflections. And in terms of reflections, we often talk about this being the backbone of motivational interviewing, utilizing the reflective listening strategies. And again, as we say, this isn't owned by motivational interviewing, because we know how to do reflections and affirmations and open-ended questions. But again, it's really, what are we looking for? So there are several ideas around reflection that we promote. And that is that this simple reflection, just, kind of coming back or paraphrasing a little bit, or rephrasing, I guess I'd say, the conversation or pieces of the conversation to help the client understand that we know, we hear you, we've got it, and it helps them to see that as well. So this simple reflection, which is a repeating back or a rephrasing of the information. Now, you want to be careful when you're doing reflections like this, simple reflections, and I will remind you that I have some examples of this on page 2 of your handout number 2, starting off with the simple, amplified, and double-sided reflections. I have a couple of examples here for you to follow along with. So the simple reflection you can be kind of a parrot. So all you're doing is actually repeating back what the person has said. And we want to be careful about that, because that can be somewhat irritating to people. They say in their head, well, or even they might say, well, isn't that what I just told you? So the simple reflection and rephrasing things is helpful in just kind of getting on the ground. But we are looking at this, this piece called complex/amplified reflection. And if you take a look at the handout on page 2, where we have, I don't plan to start that diet anytime soon, and the professional says, you don't think that eating like this will work for you right now, which is a simple reflection. It's just a restatement of what the person has said in a few different words, versus this amplified reflection, where we're really trying to pump up the volume, if you will. And pumping up the volume means that we're adding something to the mix. We might be adding an emotion. We might be adding a facial expression. You look pretty confused there, and then we reflect. So we might reflect somebody's confusion about a situation. So if you look at the amplified reflection, I don't know why my wife is worried about this. I don't drink any more than any of my friends. And so the amplified reflection is, and this is kind of turns it so your wife is worrying needlessly. And the idea, again, behind that is that you don't have to say a lot of words to make a reflection very powerful and to have it be capture everything that the person has said. The third one is what we call a double-sided reflection. And this double-sided reflection is to help us address the issue of what we've talked about before, and that is ambivalence. So when a person is feeling ambivalent and they're wavering between one position or the other, what we want to do here in that context is to make sure that we're focusing on both sides of that argument. And I'll talk about that, or we talk about that as a skill that we build to kind of think about sustained talk and change talk and giving those two things equal billing, but we do that only when the person is not making decisions. Because it's important for us to understand and reflect back neutrally if they are struggling between one or the other. Now, the next one is summaries. And what summaries do for us, and you might look at summaries as just another big reflection, but what we want to do is summarize the things. So what we've talked about here today is 3 ways that you can move ahead to lower your blood sugar, and part of that's going to be some of the eating, and some of that's going to be getting up and walking a little bit more, say walking your dog. And the third one would be is to try to watch less television. And so we're summarizing, if you will, the conversation that we've had, and trying to understand again this message that the client has given us about, and we want them to know that we hear them. So the other thing that we want to do with a summary is to ask another question of sorts. It's the what else question. And the what else question is, have I missed anything? Are there other things that you want to bring into this conversation? And where will we go from here? So a lot of times we are summarizing, and then we're moving to the next part of the interview, or we're ending the interview in some way or fashion. So I have a little bit here, this setup statement. Let me see if I have this right, and then you do some reflecting about what you've summarizing, what you've done, and then we always try to ask another question at the end of that summary about where do we move to next. So where does that leave us? What else would you like to add? Now tell me about, and again, trying to redirect the conversation again. So now I'm going to move into another area, and this other area has to do with what we call the change talk and rocking toward change talk. And the idea behind this is that it's basically a research that was done by a linguist. And this linguist talked about listening to hundreds of conversations that were motivational interviewing conversations. They were practitioners and clients or patients talking about change. And he helped us to understand that the conversation about change is so important, especially when we are bringing in these elements of change. And so the first one would be, we would call this the darn cat, of course. You can see the lady darning and the kitty cat there, but it's really having a discussion about the desire for change. So that's where we could go back to that level of importance using the ruler on a scale of 1 to 10. The D and the A are both elements of that. The R, for reasons for change, is really kind of more of an intellectual idea behind what the change could bring to this person. And the N for need is another way of thinking about what's pushing from the inside. Why should you change? Why now? Why now do you need to do that? What Paul Anharam said with his research project about this change talk is that you also have to ask for a commitment to change. You also have to ask, now what? What's next? What would you like to see happen next? Those kinds of things. We do try to stay away from what do you think you need to do, because sometimes that can push people back a little bit. But the idea that there's activation behind this and then taking steps rounds out this idea of change talk for us when we think about the way we go about this conversation about change. Now, there are a couple of other things I want to talk about here before we end today, and that is this algorithm we use for exploring concerns and options for change. So looking at this next slide here, and again, this is in your handout number 1, there's a kind of a protocol, if you will. Now, it doesn't mean you have to follow this protocol, but this is a nice way to think about exploring concerns. And remember, when we're having these conversations about change, it's all about exploring. So as you're exploring, you also want to stay close to your topic, so close to your target behavior, so that you don't take any of those bird walks, if you will. However, in order to kind of get to some of that kind of stuff, sometimes people need a little bit of preambling into that, and so we asked them, again, exploring. Tell me, can you give me an idea about how much of a problem this is for you? So asking about the problem in detail. Asking the person, when we asked that question before, what would your life look like if you stopped smoking? All right, let's talk about that some more, and how much are you using, and those kinds of things in terms of the smoking. And asking about a typical day. So what happens when you get up in the morning, from morning till night? Talk to me about a typical day regarding your smoking, or how you're managing your blood sugar, or your exercise program. Ask about lifestyle, the things that the person is doing in their life, and their stresses, the things that are affecting them, because those things are great barriers to change. And they can bump a person off the change wagon, if you will, because the stresses may be too much for a person to handle. Ask about health first in general, and then other problem behaviors around that health issue. So in general, how well do you think your health is, or how good do you think your health is in general? And are there other things that might be impacting your health? All right. We often talk about starting the conversation about the things they like about eating 5 Snicker bars a week. I go to the store and I get my chocolate bars and I eat them. That's just something I'm not willing to give up. But we talk about the things that they enjoy about that first. Then we talk about the things that are not so good about the chocolate bar. And we ask the opinion of the person. So I enjoy it. It's my relaxation. It's my reward. I've done all these other things, versus what are some of the other kinds of things? Well, I put on some weight, and it seems like it's not playing out in terms of my health very well. And after I eat all that sugar, I really want to take a nap rather than get up and go for a walk. So we talk about asking about the good things and the less good things in that relation. Asking about the problem in the past and the now. So exploring what is different about today than it has been, in the past, and what the person might want to look toward in terms of the future. Providing information. Now, that's another issue we use in healthcare called elicit, provide, elicit. Asking, asking, what do you know about reducing your weight by a specific diet plan? And they may know something about it, and they may not know something about it, but if they do or not, you can provide information related to that and then ask them what they think. So this is this thing called elicit, provide, elicit, providing information, then asking, of course, what do you think? Asking about their concerns directly, and then, of course, asking about the next step. Very important to ask about the next step and when the person would like to begin to start taking some kind of action toward a change, if necessary. And then basically winding things up in terms of the conversation, focusing on that person and their choices or what they would like to move forward with. Now, in terms of this next slide, you're going to find this on page 3 of your handout number 2 as well. And you'll find both of these things I just talked about, the list of things that's on the bottom of the page. And this particular chart is at the top of the page. And what we're looking at here is this whole idea of evocative and advocacy principles, and looking at what our role is in terms of behavior change versus no behavior change. So these evocative methods, the eliciting change talk, the ORs, this DEARS I was talking to you about, and that was in our first session, moving toward this desire, ability, reason, need, and commitment, so the darn C, if you will, toward behavior change, versus the practitioner who's the traps or the confrontation or trying to convince or the writing reflex, all those things that go in there, make for no change in the client because they're resistive or they resist and want to hang out with the status quo. So this is just a nice chart to kind of take a look at and see what it is we're actually doing and trying to achieve in our motivational interviewing conversations about change. And the other thing is that, of course, I want to bring up this idea of discord. So this slide talks about what are the kinds of things that actually get in the way of people making change. And so this sustained talk is something that we want to focus on in terms of the fact that, for heaven's sakes, they might disagree with us. And if they disagree with us, will they talk with us about that? Or are we open to hearing those disagreements? And they may not think that this is a plan for them. So are they on board with the plan of change? What we're really trying to do is we're trying to decrease what we call dissonance. And that dissonance has to do with the distancing in the relationship of the client and the practitioner. So dissonance about the target behavior, but it could be dissonance about other things as well. Also think about the issue of conflict, how we don't set up conflict with the patient, between the patient or the client and ourselves. Because this distancing kind of piece puts folks in a position to protect their egos. And it's kind of like you probably know what it's like to be pushed around in some way and not wanting that to happen for yourself. And so this disagreement or this disharmony or conflict is something we want to try to avoid. Now, it's important to understand that we do this a lot in motivational interviewing is very important in early stages of a person's relationship to get things on the right track. Once you're in a great position and you've got a great relationship with that person, things are moving along in a very good fashion. What you want to do is you can create some discrepancy or talk about some of these kinds of things that are difficult to talk about. Because it's important for them, again, for us to, and we're affecting behavior changes to help them see different things. And sometimes the harmony or the conflict or the discord is within themselves. So important for us to kind of realize and understand that part of it can be on two levels. It can be between you and the other person, and then it can also be just inside of them as well. Now, in this next slide, I just want to make the point that becoming proficient in motivational interviewing is like any new skill. I don't know about you, but I've taken piano lessons, and I'm not very good at it, and the thing that helped me the most was having somebody help me with that, or a coach, my piano instructor. We need to have practice on motivational interviewing, that we're doing it right, correctly, that we are having fidelity to the model. And it's the same as with taking tennis lessons. Lots of us can get out there and bat the ball around and have a great time doing it and have fun, but really to become very good at these things, we need to have, again, a practiced eye. Who's watching our backswing? Who's helping us, do our practices and make sure that we're on a good practice schedule so that we can really enhance or get better with our skills. So we talk about in motivational interviewing the need for us to have all of that in place. Now, I do have one more thing on your handout, number 2, that I wanted to point out to you, is where we can get stuck in using motivational interviewing. So I have that on your back page for you to take a look at. And again, we utilize these ideas about our conversation about change to make sure that we are hitting all of the important points. So take a look at those stuck points in learning motivational interviewing and where we can get stuck in that. And as I move along to that, I want to say to you, thank you very much for taking the time today and listening to this webinar and taking a look at not only the handouts, but the things that might be workable for you in your with clients or patients. And with that, I will say thank you and goodbye.